My name is Elena Marlowe. I was 38 years old and lying in a hospital bed with a tube in my throat when my fiancé kissed my best friend beside my monitor and told my mother that if they moved fast, they could take my company before anyone asked too many questions. I could not open my eyes then. I could not lift my hand. I could not even turn my head toward the sound of them. But I could hear the soft, wet click of that kiss, the rustle of Ivy's silk blouse, the tiny rattle in my IV line when my heart rate jumped, and Daniel's voice when he said, almost lazily, "She's basically gone. We need the medical consent papers first. Then the temporary control documents. If we wait, Naomi will lock everything down." That was the first moment I understood three things at once. Daniel had been sleeping with Ivy. My mother already knew. And the people standing closest to my hospital bed were not waiting to see whether I lived. They were waiting to see what they could keep if I did not. If you have ever wanted to know what helplessness feels like, it is not pain. Pain is sharp. Pain moves. Helplessness is hearing someone discuss your bank accounts in the same soft tone people use to talk about table reservations. Helplessness is knowing exactly who has stepped over the line while your own body will not let you even twitch in protest. What kept me alive in those first days was not hope. Not at first. It was rage so cold it felt clean. Because I knew something they did not. I was still there. And before they were done, I was going to make every one of them say out loud what they thought they could hide in a room with a dying woman. I was not always a hard person. For most of my life, I had been the opposite. I was the one who stayed calm when other people made messes, the one who remembered birthdays, bill due dates, medication refills, and where the spare keys were. When my father was alive, he used to say I was born listening. He would smile when he said it and tap two fingers against the side of my head like he was knocking on good wood. "You hear the room before the room hears itself," he would tell me. I did not understand what he meant when I was 12. And standing in the kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder while my mother cried over unpaid statements and my younger brother Graham asked if there was any more orange juice. I understood later. After my father died, my mother became the sort of woman who could still get dressed, still host a lunch, still buy a nice candle for the entryway, but somehow could not remember to pay the electric bill unless I reminded her. Graham became the sort of man who always had a plan and never had rent. I became the bridge between every unpaid thing and every person who wanted to pretend it was temporary. Temporary lasted 20 years. I worked my way through school, got into commercial interior design, and built Marlowe Studio from a borrowed drafting table, 2 used laptops, and the kind of stubbornness people compliment when it is making them money. At first, it was me, a freelance lighting consultant, and 1 client who paid late every month but referred everyone she knew. Then it was 6 people. Then 14. By the time I was 38, Marlowe Studio handled hotel renovation packages, senior housing interiors, boutique office retrofits, and staged commercial spaces across 3 states. We were not a giant firm, but we were steady, respected, and profitable. I owned 62% of it. Naomi Calder, my chief financial officer, owned 8. The rest sat in a combination of vested options and long-term staff shares that kept my key people tied to the company and protected it from exactly the kind of sudden power grab Daniel was already planning in my hospital room. That system existed because I had built the company after watching what happened when my father got sick. He had a stroke in a grocery store parking lot. He lived for 11 weeks after that. During those weeks, people who had barely called in years suddenly had opinions. My mother said she was too overwhelmed to deal with forms. Graham said hospitals always overcomplicate things. A cousin I had not seen in months wanted access to my father's office because he said there were old invoices in there that mattered to his business. I was 26, sleeping in chairs, eating crackers out of vending machines, and learning that illness turns paperwork into power. That was when I promised myself something. If I ever ended up in a hospital bed, nobody would get to use my silence as permission. So I filed an advance medical directive. Later, when my company grew, I filed separate continuity rules for the business as well. Medical decisions and business control were not the same. Incapacity at a hospital bed did not automatically open the door to my shares, my client accounts, or the company my employees had built with me. Everything was separated. Everything required verification. Everything ran through formal records. Daniel knew some of that. He clearly did not know enough. I met Daniel Pierce when I was 32 and tired enough to mistake charm for steadiness. He was handsome in the polished way that photographs well at openings and charity dinners. He had a good laugh, a warm hand at the small of my back, and a talent for making a room feel like it had tilted toward him. When we started dating, people told me I seemed lighter. I probably did. It is a relief, at first, to let someone else carry a little of the social weight. Ivy Mercer had been my best friend since college. She had once helped me spray paint sample boards in a freezing garage while we split a fast food meal and joked that success would smell less like dust and lacquer thinner than it did. She came into the company later to run brand partnerships and client events. She was clever, elegant, quick in conversation, and very good at making difficult people feel flattered. I trusted her with my calendar, my product launches, my private frustrations, and eventually far too much of my life. The engagement happened in May. The accident happened 8 days later. It had rained all afternoon. I was driving back from a site review 2 hours north, one hand on the wheel, one elbow resting lightly near the console, thinking about fabric lead times and whether Daniel would complain again that I worked too much during what he called our engagement season. A pickup truck ahead of me clipped pooled water, swerved, corrected too hard, and sent the whole line of traffic into that awful stuttering chaos where everyone is still moving, but nothing is under anyone's control anymore. I remember headlights, a broken guardrail, the smell of deployed airbags and rainwater, then nothing. When awareness came back, it did not come all at once. It came as pressure in my throat, beeping to my left, cold air on my skin, and voices that seemed to arrive from far away and then suddenly right beside me. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard my mother. She always said Daniel understood the business best. A man gave a small snort. Graham. She said a lot of things. The important part is what can be signed. Then Daniel, low and confident. If we present this as continuity, not a transfer, it will move faster. The hospital side is medical consent. The firm side is temporary authority. Ivy can keep clients calm. Ruth, you can say Elena told you she wanted the condo handled in family. My mother asked, what about Naomi? Ivy answered before Daniel could. Naomi doesn't have the personal warmth for this. Staff will follow Daniel if we act quickly. And if Elena never wakes up, we can formalize it later. There was a pause. I heard the crisp slide of paper. Someone uncapped a pen. Then Daniel said the sentence I have never forgotten. She's already half gone. Let's not waste the window. That was the line. Not the kiss. Not even the affair. The window. The way he said my life had turned into timing. I tried to move then. I fought so hard I felt heat flash behind my eyes. Nothing happened. My body stayed where it was, mute and heavy. Somewhere nearby, a machine began beeping faster, and someone said, "Her rate's up." A nurse came in, shoes squeaking softly, curtains shifting. "Family needs to step back," she said. Daniel answered with perfect grief in his voice, "Of course." I wanted to scream. Instead, I listened. That became my work. I listened when Ivy came in alone the next afternoon and took a phone call near the window, speaking in the bright, practical tone she used with event vendors. "No, don't cancel the Hartwell presentation," she said. "We're adjusting leadership temporarily. Daniel will step in. Elena isn't responsive. Not isn't speaking. Not is in critical condition. Isn't responsive. Words matter. They build rooms people can trap you inside." I listened when Graham stood beside my bed and laughed softly while texting. "If she doesn't make it, at least the Lake Street condo can finally do something useful," he said to someone. "Mom should move in there. Or we rent it. Waste of a place." I listened when my mother opened the drawer in the hospital room and sorted through my things with the slow entitlement of someone clearing out a guest room after a long weekend. "This ring needs to be kept safe," she murmured. I felt her touch my left hand. That was the first time I nearly gave myself away. The engagement ring Daniel had placed on my finger under restaurant lights 8 days earlier had been my grandmother's. It was not the cost that mattered. It was the fact that my father had kept it for me in the back of his sock drawer after my grandmother died, wrapped in old receipt paper because he never trusted velvet boxes. He used to say he would know the right time to hand it over. He never got the chance. I found it myself after his funeral, under winter socks and a bent tie clip, with a note in his handwriting that said, "For when you choose joy without apology." My mother started pulling it off my hand. Inside the prison of my body, I went cold. But before she could get it past my knuckle, a different voice spoke from the doorway. "Please leave that where it is." That voice belonged to Tessa Wynn, the night nurse who would later save more than my health. She was not dramatic. She did not sweep into rooms. She was a compact woman with tidy braids, peppermint gum, soft gray sneakers, and the habit of folding one glove into the other before throwing them away. Her voice always sounded level, even when she was tired. My mother gave the kind of laugh she used on contractors she did not respect. "I'm her mother," Tessa answered, "and this is still her property." A tiny silence followed. Then my mother said, clipped and cool, "Of course." The ring stayed. That night, long after the hallway quieted and the overhead lights dimmed to a low amber that made the room feel like an airport after midnight, Tessa checked my pupils, adjusted a line, and then stood still beside me for so long that I wondered if she had left. Then she said, very softly, "If you can hear me, blink once." I could not see her face. I could only hear the hum of the monitor and the paper-soft brush of her sleeve when she leaned closer. I blinked. The sound that left her was not a gasp. It was smaller than that, a quick breath pulled in and held. "Okay," she whispered. "Again, blink once for yes, twice for no. Can you hear me?" I blinked once. The rest of that night changed my life. Not because I suddenly got free. Because someone had finally confirmed I was not trapped alone. Tessa did not make promises. She did not say movie things. She did not tell me everything would be okay. What she did was better. She tested. Repeatedly. Simple commands. Blink once. Look left. Try to lift one finger. Rest. Again. By 4 a.m, she had enough to chart purposeful response. By 7, she had notified the attending team. By noon, a speech therapist had placed a basic letterboard in my room. I still could not manage it well. My eyes tired quickly. My throat burned. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. But little by little, a path opened. Not to speech, to proof. And proof was what I needed most. Because here was the problem. Awareness does not become power the moment it exists. It becomes power when someone with authority records it, timestamps it, verifies it, and makes it hard for liars to step around. Until then, it is just a truth trapped in a room. Daniel and the others did not know what Tessa had found that night, or rather, they knew just enough to misunderstand it. A resident mentioned possible intermittent response in front of Daniel on the second day after Tessa's chart note. Daniel took that phrase and treated it the way greedy people treat warnings, like inconvenience, like delay, like something that could still be outrun. I heard him in the hallway. "Intermittent doesn't mean capacity," he told Ivy. "We stay on track, as if my body was a meeting agenda. As my communication improved in tiny, exhausting pieces, the structure around me became clearer. Daniel had already contacted 2 board members and framed himself as the obvious continuity lead. Ivy was reinforcing that story with clients. My mother was telling relatives that I had always said Daniel was as good as family. Graham had started visiting my condo with my building fob, which meant someone had taken it from my key dish at home. A staff member from the office texted Naomi that Daniel was requesting access changes, quote, "for emergency management." Naomi refused. That refusal was the first thing that slowed them. Naomi Calder had worked with me for 9 years. She wore dark-framed glasses, kept her hair in a low knot that loosened by late afternoon, and had the unsettling gift of making sloppy people feel naked with one quiet question. She was not warm in the public way, she was warm in the useful way. She remembered your kid's surgery date. She sent food when someone's parent died. She kept handwritten backup numbers in a locked drawer because software fails and storms happen and people panic when they should plan. I had once told Daniel that if Marlowe's studio had a spine besides me, it was Naomi. Later I learned that he took that as a challenge. On the third night after Tessa found me, Naomi came to the hospital and was told I was resting, told visitors were limited, told Daniel was managing information. She left without a scene. An hour later she came back during Tessa's shift. The smell of rain clung to her coat. She stood on my left, out of the line where cameras might have seen her mouth clearly, and Tessa held up the board. It took forever. I blinked through letters. Tired. Stopping. Starting again. D-I-R-E-C-T-I versus E. Naomi went still. Then, yes, she said, I know. More blinking. P-O-R-T-A-L. Yes. S-E-P-A-R-A-T-E. Yes, she said again, more firmly this time. Medical and business. Separate. Tessa asked quietly, Is there a conflict marker? Naomi looked at her. There is. That was when I knew I still had a chance. Years earlier, when I set up the company continuity structure, our attorney had recommended a formal conflict review clause. If any person seeking emergency authority over my company had a personal financial interest tied to my incapacity, the request would trigger an internal hold pending verification. It was not flashy, it was not dramatic, it was the corporate equivalent of a deadbolt. Daniel had probably assumed he could slide past it because he was my fiancé and had worked in business development. Ivy had probably assumed her long access to clients and communications made her untouchable. My mother and Graham had almost certainly assumed family emotion could flatten whatever remained. But records do not care who cries first. Over the next week, I did 3 things. I healed enough to communicate, I listened enough to map the trap they were building for themselves, and I stayed silent long enough for them to keep choosing greed, in full view of systems they did not understand. That silence was the hardest thing I have ever done. If you have never had to lie still while someone insults your intelligence beside your own bed, you may think revenge is the hard part. It is not. Discipline is the hard part. Discipline is hearing Daniel tell my mother, once we formalize temporary authority, the apartment and personal accounts can be consolidated for care expenses, and not opening your eyes. Discipline is hearing Ivy say, we should remove Elena's name slowly from client-facing material, not right away. That would look bad. And keeping your pulse steady. Discipline is hearing Graham laugh because he had already moved 2 boxes from my condo into my mother's guest room so nothing valuable gets stolen, and not ripping the monitor off the wall with pure fury. They were not subtle. People rarely are when they think the room belongs to them. A few details I will never forget. The smell of my mother's hand cream when she flipped through papers near my bed as if I were furniture. The little click Ivy made with her nails against her phone case when she lied. The way Daniel's voice dropped into false tenderness every time a doctor walked in, then hardened the second the door closed. The phrase Graham kept using, keeping things practical, whenever he wanted to excuse something ugly. That phrase had followed him since he was 17 and sold our father's old camera without asking because, in his words, nobody used film anymore, and he needed money for something practical. I had cried in the bathroom after that, not because of the camera alone, but because my mother shrugged and said, "He's young, don't make everything emotional." Graham was 34 now, still practical, still spending other people's sentiment for cash. Before we continue, I want to say this. Hidden Revenge Stories channel shares stories of people who take back control of their lives. If this story speaks to you, leave your thoughts below and tell me where you are listening to this story from. Do you have siblings too? What kind of people are they? By the second week, the pressure shifted. Daniel had become bolder because my formal evaluation had not yet been completed. I was improving, but slowly. My focus came in waves. Some mornings I could follow commands for 10 minutes and then lose strength so sharply it felt like falling through ice. The neurologist wanted consistency before finalizing a capacity report. Daniel treated that gap like open land. He scheduled what he called a continuity session. That session was supposed to bring together hospital administration, my family, key company leadership, and legal counsel, so emergency authority could be discussed for the good of the patient and the stability of the business. He invited Naomi. He invited Ivy. He invited a notary. He invited 2 board members who had never liked confrontation. He did not know that by doing so, he had chosen a stage. While he prepared for that meeting, he kept making mistakes. That is the thing about people who think they are managing a dying woman's life. They get greedy too early. Ivy had maintenance remove my office nameplate and store it in a drawer. She asked facilities to swap the artwork in my office because Daniel preferred a cleaner look. She forwarded herself files from an account she should not have been inside. She told a hotel client that I had wanted new energy at the top if anything happened to me. Daniel went further. He called an acquisition contact I had once turned down and reopened a conversation about a partial sale. He floated numbers. He suggested he could ensure a smooth leadership transition. He even discussed his future title. My future title, apparently, was silence. Naomi documented everything. Not loudly, not theatrically, she documented. Dates, requests, emails, access attempts, messages, timestamps. Tessa documented on the hospital side. Purposeful blink response. Directed eye movement. Auditory comprehension. Communication board usage. Switch-assisted selection. Emotional distress in the presence of certain visitors. Visitor interference. Attempts to handle patient property. One afternoon, the speech therapist introduced a simple switch that I could press with the side of my thumb when my hand strength allowed it. It connected to a tablet that let me choose preset responses and, eventually, record short audio messages when I could manage a whisper. The first message I recorded took 45 minutes and left me shaking. "Do not stop them yet," I said. My voice sounded like torn paper. Naomi listened once and closed her eyes. "You're sure?" she asked. I pressed yes. The second message was shorter. "Make it public." That was the heart of it. I did not want Daniel cornered in a private office where he could frame himself as misunderstood. I did not want Ivy crying in a hallway and telling people things had only looked bad. I did not want my mother rewriting the story over lunch for the next 10 years, saying everyone had simply been stressed. No, I wanted records, witnesses, and their own mouths. So I waited. They gave me more than I expected. 3 days before the continuity session, Daniel came into my room late, long after visiting hours, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and the whiskey he thought nobody noticed on his breath after client dinners. He pulled a chair near my bed and sat down. For a moment he said nothing. Then, in a low voice meant to sound intimate, he said, "You always hated making the hard choices, Elena. That's the funny thing. People thought you were strong because you worked so much, but mostly you were just useful." I felt my hand twitch against the sheet. He noticed. His breath caught. Then he leaned forward and studied my face. I went still, completely still. After a moment, he smiled, not with relief, with calculation. "Maybe you're in there?" he said softly. "Maybe not. Either way, by the time you can do anything about it, the structure will already be in place." Then he stood and adjusted the blanket at my shoulder with the same careful hand he used to use when photographers were nearby. That night, I recorded another message for Naomi. "He knows, maybe," I whispered. Her answer came the next morning through Tessa. "He still filed the request." "Good. Let him." The continuity session was scheduled for Thursday at 11 in a hospital conference suite 2 floors below Neuro Step Down. That morning smelled like overbrewed coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Tessa washed my face with a warm cloth, helped the therapist position me more upright, and checked my hand strength twice. Naomi arrived in a navy suit and placed my father's brass drafting compass on the rolling tray beside my bed. I stared at it. She said quietly, "From your office. It should be where you can see it." That compass had sat on my desk for years. It had belonged to my father. He used it for sketching old house plans at the kitchen table when I was little. It was useless now for actual drafting. I kept it because it reminded me that circles close, measurements return. What looks like drifting can still have a center. That morning, it felt like a promise. At 10:30, hospital legal came in, then the neurologist, then a patient relations officer, then Naomi, then one board member, then the other. Daniel arrived last out of the people who expected to win, wearing a dark suit and a careful expression of contained sorrow. Ivy came, in pale blue, hair perfect, holding a folio. My mother wore pearls. Graham looked like he had wandered into the wrong place and decided to act annoyed about it. I was not in the room yet. That was part of the plan. Daniel assumed I was too impaired to attend. He also assumed the meeting would center on him. For the first few minutes, it did. The hospital council opened with process. My condition, my current limitations, the purpose of the meeting. Then Daniel began. He spoke about love, commitment, stability. He said I had always leaned on him in business-facing situations. He said the company needed a recognizable interim leader. He said my mother, as family, could confirm my wishes. He described Ivy as a trusted long-term associate, essential to client continuity. He framed Naomi as financially skilled, but too internal to reassure the outside world. Then he presented the papers: medical consent expansion, emergency liaison authority, corporate continuity request, temporary access recommendations. My mother confirmed. Graham confirmed. Ivy confirmed. I let them. That was the first step of the collapse, the false confidence stage, the moment where greedy people mistake a microphone for safety. Then hospital counsel said, "Before we proceed, there is a records issue." Daniel's face barely changed, but I saw the flicker. The patient relations officer slid a folder across the table. "There is an advance directive on file," she said. "There is also a separate alert tied to patient records, indicating a standing separation between medical consent and business control." Daniel answered quickly. "I'm aware there were old planning documents. My understanding is those were superseded by current circumstances." Naomi did not even look at him. Hospital counsel said, "Nothing has superseded them." Silence. Then the neurologist spoke. "Additionally, there is documented purposeful response across multiple dates." Daniel leaned back. "Intermittent response. I was informed that was not the same as capacity." The neurologist folded his hands. "Correct, which is why we assessed further." He nodded toward the door. That was when they brought me in. I was in a wheelchair. My legs were covered with a gray blanket. My left hand still shook. My face looked thinner than I remembered. But my eyes were open, fully open. I had imagined that moment many times while staring into darkness. I thought maybe my mother would cry. I thought maybe Graham would freeze. I thought Ivy might look ashamed. I was wrong about some of that. My mother did gasp and cover her mouth. Graham muttered, "What the?" Ivy went white so quickly it looked almost blue. Daniel did not stand. He stared at me with the expression of a man watching a locked door open from the inside. Tessa positioned my chair. The speech therapist placed my switch by my hand. The room smelled suddenly sharper, like someone had uncapped a bottle of antiseptic. The neurologist continued with the flat calm of a man who deals in facts for a living. "Ms. Marlowe is physically limited but cognitively aware. Her communication has been documented through repeated command response, board-assisted interaction, and switch-based confirmation. Capacity for broader legal determinations will continue to be monitored, but she is capable of expressing preferences and identifying specific individuals and conflicts. That changes this process." Daniel found his voice first. "Elena," he said, so softly that a stranger might have mistaken it for devotion. I pressed the switch. The tablet voice said, clear and mechanical, "Do not use my first name like that." If there had been any chance of private smoothing after that, it died right there. The room changed, not emotionally, structurally. Hospital counsel asked whether I wished the prior directive to remain active. Yes. Whether I affirmed the separation between medical matters and business control. Yes. Whether I objected to Daniel Pierce, Ivy Mercer, Ruth Marlowe, or Graham Marlowe acting on my behalf in business or property matters. Yes. One by one. Each yes landed harder than the last. Then Naomi slid a packet forward. "For the record," she said, "there were also unauthorized access attempts on company systems, unauthorized client representations, and preliminary sale discussions initiated without board approval under the assumption of Ms. Marlowe's incapacity." Daniel turned toward her. "That is a gross distortion." Naomi met his eyes. "We can do timestamps now if you like." Graham tried to break in. "This is insane. We were trying to help." The patient relations officer said, "Mr. Marlowe, you told nursing staff you had authority over the patient's residence. You do not." My mother spoke then, trembling with offended dignity. "I am her mother." I pressed the switch again. The tablet said, "That is not a title deed." Ivy made a sound then, not quite a sob, more like air breaking in her throat. Daniel looked at me, then at the room, recalculating. You could almost hear it. He shifted from certainty to salvage. "Elena," he said, more firmly now, "you've been through something traumatic. People may have misunderstood conversations. We were protecting what you built." I had saved one thing for that moment. Naomi nodded to Tessa. Tessa handed hospital counsel a small drive. Counsel placed it on the table. "These are patient room audio captures voluntarily recorded by Ms. Marlowe after communication assist was established," she said. "The patient requested they be preserved because she believed there were active efforts to exploit her incapacity." Daniel actually laughed once. "Too sharp. Too quick. Secret recordings? Seriously?" Counsel answered. "Recorded by the patient in her own room." Then she played one. I did not watch the speaker. I watched faces. Daniel's voice came through first. Calm. Distinct. "She's basically gone. We need the medical consent papers first, then the temporary control documents. Then Ivy. If Elena never wakes up, we can formalize it later. Then my mother. What about the condo? Then Graham, with that ugly little half-laugh. At least he can finally do something useful." The sound quality was not perfect. It did not need to be. The room had enough. That was step 2. Authority confirmation. Not my anger. Not my accusation. Their own words, held against records, with witnesses in place. Daniel's face changed, then in a way I will probably remember until I die. It was not guilt. It was the look of a man realizing that charm has no jurisdiction over a documented timeline. Ivy began to cry openly. My mother said, "This is cruel." Cruel. The word nearly made me smile. Then came step 3. Self-collapse. Because greedy people, when publicly cornered, almost never stop talking soon enough to save themselves. Daniel straightened his jacket. "Fine," he said. "Fine. We discussed possibilities. We were under enormous stress. But the business still needs leadership, and I have already initiated conversations that can't simply be reversed because Elena opened her eyes." Naomi said, "With whom?" He hesitated. One of the board members, a man named Peter Hall, who hated conflict so much that he usually looked apologetic while approving budgets, spoke up in a thin voice. "Daniel, did you sign anything?" Silence. Then Ivy, weeping now and angry enough to lose control, snapped, "Tell them about Hartwell." There it was. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Naomi turned to the board. "Hartwell Hospitality sent a notice this morning referencing representations of pending authority and transition assurances. There is also a draft term sheet." Hospital counsel asked, "Signed by whom?" Nobody had to answer. His silence did it for him. Graham then tried to jump in and make it smaller. So he got ahead of himself. That doesn't mean Naomi cut him off. There were also attempted vendor changes, office reassignment, client misrepresentations, and property access abuses. My mother said, "Property access? She let us in that condo for years." I pressed the switch. The tablet said, "Support is not ownership." The room went still again. My mother's eyes filled, but not with repentance, with humiliation. That mattered to me more than I expected, because for years she had relied on a soft moral trick. Anything I gave became, in her mind, proof that I had always owed it. Every bill I covered erased the fact that it had been mine to cover in the first place. Now, in front of witnesses, that trick stopped working. Hospital counsel ended the session formally. My directive remained in force. Medical decisions stayed within the documented structure. Business authority remained untouched by Daniel's requests. A conflict review was opened regarding the misuse of my condition. Security notes were placed on my chart. Visitor permissions were narrowed at my request. Daniel tried once more as people began to stand. "Elena, don't do this," he said. I turned my head toward him fully for the first time since the accident. I spoke without the tablet then. My voice was rough, but it was mine. "I already did. That should have been enough." But I was not finished. Because the hospital session protected me, it did not yet finish then. The public collapse came 3 days later at Marlowe's studio. I insisted on being there. Naomi argued for caution. The neurologist argued for rest. Tessa, who had no vote in business matters and still somehow managed to radiate disapproval in all directions, told me if I pushed too hard I would pay for it physically. They were all right. I went anyway. The all-staff meeting had been called under the excuse of stability and updates. Daniel thought he could still manage the company story if he moved fast enough. Ivy thought maybe she could survive by framing herself as confused, manipulated, or merely overloyal. Instead, they walked into the main presentation room at 11:30 and found the entire leadership team seated, board counsel present, Hartwell's legal representative on video, and me at the head of the table in a dark sweater, a cane braced lightly against my chair. The room smelled like printer toner, coffee, and the lemon oil our cleaning crew used on the conference table. My father's brass compass sat in front of me. That detail was deliberate. People notice symbols more deeply than they admit. Every staff member who had worked with me for more than a year knew that compass. They knew whose desk it belonged to. They knew it meant I was not absent from the room, no matter how weak I looked. Naomi opened the meeting. Then she walked through it all. Unauthorized authority claims, misuse of patient incapacity, improper client communications, access violations, false continuity statements, preliminary external sale contact without approval. By the time she finished, nobody in the room was confused about what this was. Not a misunderstanding. A grab. Hartwell's representative then confirmed that Daniel had implied control he did not possess. Ivy tried to say she had only been supporting communications. Naomi presented the forwarded email trail. Graham, who had not even been invited, but had shown up because my mother told him family should be seen, started complaining from the back about how none of this would be happening if I had just been clearer about who got what. He said it in front of my staff, the same staff who had stayed late for me, helped me move offices twice in 10 years, carried sample trunks through sleet, sent flowers to my condo after my father died, and texted Naomi in quiet alarm when Daniel started acting like the building already belonged to him. That was the moment Daniel truly lost the room. Not when the lawyers spoke, when Graham exposed the family logic underneath it all. The logic that said my work had always been communal property because I was the one who built enough to be plundered. People understand greed fast when they hear it spoken plainly. Board counsel terminated Daniel's employment and revoked all pending authority considerations. Ivy's access was ended immediately, and her unvested options were canceled under the misconduct clause she had once praised as clean governance. Graham was instructed to return the company vehicle he had been borrowing temporarily for almost 11 months. My mother's occupancy arrangement for the Lake Street condo, which had been quietly prepared as a future safety net for her through my estate planning, was revoked before it ever began. She had never known it existed. That was another circle closing. Because I had, in fact, planned for her. Even after everything, I had built a protected residential provision for my mother in case of age-related need. Not ownership. Use. Safe, limited, supported use. Naomi and our attorney had prepared it months before the accident because I believed care could be arranged without surrendering assets entirely. That provision vanished the moment my mother joined an effort to exploit my incapacity. There were conditions. She had never imagined conditions would apply to her. At the end of the meeting, Daniel stood up as if he still thought there might be a final speech that would save him. "Elena," he said, "after everything, you're going to destroy all of this over words said in a hospital room?" I looked at him, then at Ivy, then at my mother and brother, and I said the line I had carried inside me for 2 weeks. You heard my silence and mistook it for permission. The room stayed still. Then I added, "This ends today." No one answered. They were done, not because I had shouted them down, because the structure no longer held for them. Their access was gone. Their story was gone. Their confidence was gone. And worst of all, for people like that, the audience was gone. Afterward, there were practical things. Always practical things. Locks changed. Passwords rotated. Building access updated. Hartwell informed. Clients reassured. Board minutes filed. Visitor lists narrowed. Insurance counsel notified. Personal property recovered from my condo in labeled boxes, including 3 scarves, 2 framed photos, 1 silver serving spoon from my grandmother, and the ring box Daniel had already moved from my bedroom drawer to his dresser. That last detail came from a cleaning woman at my condo building who had seen him carrying personal items out the week after the accident and felt uneasy enough to mention it when Naomi asked quiet questions. There are always people who see more than liars count on. That matters. Recovery did not happen all at once either. It came like the return of small, ordinary citizenship to my own life. The first time I stood at the rehab sink and washed my face without help, I cried afterward from the effort and then laughed because the thing that had undone me emotionally was not the grand betrayal but a washcloth and warm water. The first time I walked 10 full steps with only a cane and no therapist holding the belt at my waist, Tessa clapped once and told me not to get sentimental about it. The first time I slept through a whole night without dreaming of monitor alarms, the morning light looked almost suspiciously kind. I cut off my mother and Graham completely. That sentence sounds cleaner than the process felt. There were messages, not apologies, narratives. My mother said families say terrible things under stress. Graham said I was taking everything too far and punishing people who had panicked. A cousin called to say my mother was embarrassed in church. Daniel sent one email asking for a chance to explain and another asking about personal belongings, as if the wound and the laundry might fit in the same category. Ivy wrote a 6-page letter that used the word complicated 9 times and the word sorry only once. I answered none of them myself. Counsel handled what required handling. Silence handled the rest. 3 months after the accident, I went back to the office part-time. The first morning I returned, the building smelled like fresh paint near reception because facilities had repaired the wall where Ivy's decorative shelf had been moved. My office had been restored exactly as I liked it. Sample books on the low credenza, olive tree by the window, brass compass on the desk. My father's old receipt paper note, framed inside the drawer where only I could see it. For when you choose joy without apology. Naomi had placed a ceramic mug near my keyboard. Off-white, slightly crooked, handmade. It was the kind of gift she gave only when words would have made things clumsy. There was a card with it. No speech, just this. Welcome back. We kept the bones solid. I sat at my desk and put my hand over the compass. Then I looked out at the glass conference room, at people moving with purpose, at a company that had bent but not broken, and I understood something I had not let myself admit before the accident. I had spent too much of my life confusing loyalty with endless availability. I thought being good meant staying useful to people who felt entitled to me. It did not. Being good did not require being open to theft. That lesson changed more than my visitor list. It changed the shape of my days. I sold the engagement ring and used the money to start a staff emergency fund in my father's name. I updated every directive I had. More layers, more explicit conditions, not because I had become fearful, but because clarity is a form of mercy you owe yourself. I moved out of the condo for a while and rented a small house near the water with deep porch steps and a kitchen that caught morning light on the table. I wanted a place no one had memories of entering without knocking. I wanted rooms that did not carry the air of being pre-claimed by someone else's need. Tessa came for dinner once after a long shift and brought grocery store tulips wrapped in crackling plastic. Naomi came another Sunday and corrected my estimate on timber costs while standing barefoot on my porch with coffee in her hand. We did not talk much about Daniel, or Ivy, or my mother. The people who deserve space in your new life are often the ones who do not insist on standing at the center of it. By late autumn, I could drive again. By winter, I could walk the entire length of the office without the cane. By spring, I stopped checking door locks twice. There is one final scene I keep, and maybe it is the real ending. It was a Saturday morning nearly a year after the accident. The air was cool enough that my breath showed faintly when I stepped outside with a mug of coffee. The porch boards held the night chill. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and then settled. Inside, the house smelled like toast and the rosemary plant on the kitchen sill. I had a stack of papers with me, not dramatic ones, routine ones, insurance renewal, board committee notes, a property tax statement, boring, adult, ordinary proof that my life belonged to me again. I sat down in the porch chair, tucked one foot under the other, and listened to the kind of silence that does not threaten you. The good kind. The earned kind. For years, I had filled silence by smoothing over everybody else's needs before they could become demands. I had made myself useful so often that people stopped noticing the cost. Daniel noticed the cost only when he thought it could be converted. Ivy noticed it only when she thought it could carry her upward. My mother and Graham noticed it only when it stopped arriving. Now, finally, silence was not what other people used against me. It was what I kept for myself. A little later, Naomi texted about a budget line. I answered. Tessa sent a photo of a terrible vending machine muffin and blamed me for teaching her to expect better coffee. I smiled. The day opened cleanly. No one had access they had not earned. No one was holding papers over my head. No one was standing beside my bed waiting for a window. That was the life I had wanted, without knowing how badly I wanted it. Not revenge as spectacle, not ruin for ruin's sake. Order. Distance. My own name on my own door. And the deep, steady knowledge that the people who mistook my patience for weakness had finally learned the difference between being trusted and merely being close enough to steal. They had wanted my silence. I kept my life.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to hear more, you can follow this channel. Don't forget to hit that little bell icon to be notified when a new video is uploaded.